They call me Sir at the hardware store, Sweetheart at the diner, and Old Man behind my back at my son's office, and I answer to all three, because none of them know my name is on the deed to the building he works in. I am 64 years old. I drive a 2009 Ford Ranger with a bad muffler and a passenger door that only opens from the outside if you know to lift it while you pull. It used to be dark green. Now, it's the color of a green that gave up arguing with the sun a long time ago. I wear the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation, work boots that have been resoled twice, and a watch my father gave me that stopped keeping time accurately sometime during the Clinton administration. I still wear it. Not because it tells time, because it tells me something else. I live on Route 9 outside a town called Miller's Creek, in a house I built with my own hands over 4 summers, back before my knees started sending me monthly invoices for that decision. My neighbor, Frank Delgado, retired Army, terrible fisherman, once told me I was the most broke-looking rich man he'd ever met. I told him I wasn't rich. He laughed. I laughed. We talked about his tomatoes for 20 minutes, and I drove home. Here's what Frank doesn't know. Here's what the girl at the DMV who once asked if I needed help filling out a form in simple words doesn't know. Here's what the loan officer who looked at my truck through the window and suggested I might want to consider a cosigner doesn't know. I own Millbrook Holdings. Manufacturing, commercial real estate, a logistics arm, a controlling stake in 2 regional banks. Structured through enough shell layers and family trusts that my name shows up on nothing you'd find with a quick search. No profile in any business journal. No plaque with my name on a building lobby. No photograph at a Chamber of Commerce dinner. I built it that way on purpose, over 38 years, one decision at a time, and I have never once confused being noticed with being right. Millbrook Holdings is worth $2.7 billion. I drive a truck with a check engine light that's been on so long I've started to consider it a design feature, and I wouldn't trade a single day of it. Now, let me tell you about my son. Tyler Whitfield is 31 years old, and he is, without exaggeration or apology, the best thing I ever built, better than any company, any building, any deal I ever closed. He's got his mother's patience, which is a miracle, because he sure didn't get it from me. When he was 8, he traded his own bicycle to another kid, for that kid's broken bicycle, a beat-up thing with a bent wheel, because the other kid was crying about it and Tyler figured a kid who could fix things shouldn't mind fixing a bad one. He fixed it in a weekend, gave it back. I remember thinking, this boy is going to get taken advantage of his whole life unless somebody teaches him when to say no. I tried. I'm not sure it ever took, not all the way. What I did not anticipate, not for 1 second, was who he was going to marry. 2 years ago, Tyler brought home Marissa Doyle. I want to be fair to Marissa. I want to be generous and even-handed here, because I try to be a reasonable man, so let me say this as kindly as I can manage. Marissa Doyle looks at a room the way an appraiser looks at a house before deciding what it's worth to tear down and rebuild. She's 29, sharp, well put together in the specific way of someone who has studied exactly which fork to use and made sure everyone at the table noticed her studying it. Within 20 minutes of meeting me, she'd mentioned her sorority's philanthropic gala, her father's boat, and a ski trip to a resort in Colorado I'd apparently be expected to recognize by name. I nodded. I said, "That sounds lovely." 8 months after the wedding, Marissa's father, a man named Roger Doyle, arranged for Tyler to be hired as Regional Operations Director at Halbrook Freight Systems. Now, here's where I need you to stay with me, because this is the part that matters. Halbrook Freight Systems is a subsidiary of Millbrook Holdings, a good company, 280 employees, solid contracts, real bones. Tyler got that job through what looked, from every visible angle, like a completely ordinary hire. A recommendation from Roger, a round of interviews, a background check, sign-off from the regional board. It looked clean. It looked earned. What nobody knew, what Tyler still does not know to this day, is that I own Halbrook Freight Systems, and I quietly reviewed every single piece of that hiring process myself before it ever reached a final signature. I read his resume personally. I sat in on a call with his last supervisor, unannounced, using a name that wasn't mine. I approved the offer. And then I hung up the phone, drove out to check on a fence line that had come loose in a storm, and spent the rest of the afternoon fixing it with wire and a come-along, same as I would any other Tuesday. Tyler called me that night, so excited his voice was cracking a little around the edges. Dad, I got it. Regional director. Marissa's dad really came through for me. Proud of you, son, I said. You earned it. Then I hung up the phone and went to check on the fence again, because that particular kind of loose wire never really stays fixed the first time. I want to be honest about something. In the beginning, I liked Marissa fine. I did. I don't make my mind up about people fast, and I've been wrong about people plenty of times in 64 years, wrong in both directions. People surprise you. I kept waiting to be surprised. Marissa did not surprise me. Instead, she showed me, slowly, patiently, one small comment at a time, exactly who she was. It started small, the way it always does. A comment about my truck needing an upgrade. Dad Whitfield, seriously. A joke at a barbecue about how I dressed like I was, still waiting on a union pension. Small things. I let them roll off. Then came the company holiday party, his company, he believed, where Tyler introduced me to one of his colleagues, and before the man could even ask what I did for work, Tyler said, "Oh, he's retired." Marissa's father-in-law. The man nodded politely, said it was nice to meet me, and moved on to somebody more interesting. I smiled. I got another glass of punch. I filed it away. But the moment that actually changed, something happened on an ordinary Wednesday about 3 months ago. I had stopped by the Halbrook offices to go over some numbers quietly with one of my people, using a side entrance I'd used for years. The kind of thing you can do when you built the building and nobody who works there has any idea what you look like. I was walking past the break room, unremarkable as I always am, an old man in a flannel shirt that nobody looks at twice, when I heard Tyler's voice through the half-open door. He was talking to somebody, another manager by the sound of it. Marissa's dad, Tyler was saying, and I could hear him almost laughing as he said it. No, not her dad, mine, he's harmless. Sweet old guy, I think he peaked somewhere around 1,995. Fixes fences for a living, basically. You know the type. He lowered his voice, but not quite low enough. Marissa's parents keep asking why he still drives that junker. It's a little embarrassing, honestly, at family stuff. But what are you gonna do? Family's family. I stood there for a second. Then I straightened my collar and walked back out the side entrance the way I'd come in. Peaked in 1995. Fixes fences for a living. I let those words sit with me for 3 months. I am a patient man. I come from patient people. My father used to say, "Son, a fence post doesn't argue with the wind. It just stands there until the wind gets tired." I stood there. I kept standing there. If you've been with me a while, do me one small favor before we go further. Hit that subscribe button. Doesn't cost you a thing, and it means more than you'd think to a guy like me. Thank you, genuinely. The dinner invitation came on a Sunday evening. Tyler called me, warm, easy, the way he always is with me even when he's being an idiot in every other direction. Roger and his wife Deborah were hosting a family dinner out at their place in Cedar Hollow, wanted everybody together, one big happy family, they said. "Dad, you'll like them," Tyler said. "They're good people, once you get past the boat talk." "I'm sure they are," I said. I already knew a few things about Roger and Deborah Doyle that would have made that sentence a lot harder for Tyler to say if he'd known them too, but I kept that to myself. I told him I'd be there. Then Marissa called. She called me directly, which was unusual enough on its own to be worth noting. She was friendly, casual, in the specific tone of someone who's about to say something a little insulting and has decided to say it anyway because she's already decided it's for your own good. "Hey, just a heads up about Saturday," she said. "My parents are pretty traditional, kind of old school, appearance-wise, so it might be worth maybe dressing up a little. Nothing crazy, just something a bit more put together than usual." There was a pause where she clearly expected me to feel something about that. "Marissa," I said pleasantly, "I appreciate you thinking of me." "Of course," she said, relieved. "Just want everyone comfortable. You know how it is." "I do," I said. "I'll see you Saturday." I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a good while. Then I walked to my closet, past the one suit I own, dark gray, worn twice, once for a funeral and once for a merger signing 8 years back, and I pulled out my regular clothes. Clean jeans, a pressed flannel shirt, the boots. I laid them out for Saturday. Then I walked out to the driveway, put my hand flat on the hood of the Ranger, the way you'd rest a hand on the shoulder of somebody you trust before something important. We're going to a dinner, old girl, I thought. Dress code is exactly who we already are. Because here's what Marissa didn't understand. Here's what Roger and Deborah Doyle didn't understand. Here's what nobody at that table was going to understand until it was far too late to take it back. I wasn't wearing my regular clothes because I didn't own better. I was wearing them because I wanted to watch, clearly and without interference, exactly who these people were when they believed nothing was at stake in front of them. And I had a feeling, quiet and certain, the kind of feeling that takes decades to earn, that Saturday was going to show me everything I needed to know. Saturday came the way important days do, without announcing itself. I woke at 5:30, same as every morning for 40 years, made my coffee black, sat at my kitchen table, and watched the light come up slow over the ridge behind the house. I was calm. I'm always calm. It might be the most underrated tool a man can carry around with him. I got dressed slow and deliberate. Clean jeans, the light blue flannel, pressed the night before. My regular boots, polished but nothing fancy. The watch that doesn't work. I looked in the mirror and thought, that's exactly right. I walked out, got in the Ranger, and the engine turned over with that low complaining rattle I've come to find almost comforting, and I drove out to Cedar Hollow. The Doyle place sat at the end of a long paved driveway lined with landscaping that had clearly been maintained by people who got paid specifically to make hedges look like they'd never once been unruly in their lives. I pulled the Ranger up near the front, and a young man in a collared shirt, not quite valet, not quite anything, stepped forward to take the keys. He looked at the truck, looked at me, looked back at the truck, doing some quiet internal math that didn't come out in my favor. "Evening, sir," he said, recovering fast. "I can park that for you." "Appreciate it, son," I said, handing him the keys. "She pulls right if you don't watch her." He nodded like a man trying very hard not to have further opinions about a truck. Roger opened the door before I could knock. Tall, tan, 68, the kind of handshake that ends exactly when it's supposed to and not a second later. "William," he said. "My name is Warren, but I let it go. Glad you made it out. Come on in." The house had the kind of high ceilings and curated art that exists specifically to be admired rather than lived with. Deborah appeared from the sitting room, elegant in the particular overstyled way, took both my hands in hers. "We've heard so much about you," she said. "You're just as sweet as Tyler described." Sweet. There it was. Not sharp, not accomplished, not interesting. Sweet. The word you use for a golden retriever or a relative who doesn't quite track the conversation anymore. "Thank you, Deborah," I said warmly. "Beautiful home." She beamed. People who've built their whole identity around what they own never get tired of hearing it admired. Marissa crossed the room and hugged me, a little too briskly. Tyler appeared behind her, looked at my outfit with an expression he controlled almost fast enough that I didn't catch it. Almost. "Dad, glad you made it," he said, clapping my shoulder the way men do when they're performing something for whoever's watching. We moved to the dining room. Crystal, heavy silverware, candles that had clearly never been lit before and probably wouldn't be again after tonight. I sat down, unfolded my napkin, and I disappeared. Not because anybody made me disappear, because I let it happen. 64 years teaches you that the most dangerous thing a man can do in a room full of people, underestimating him, is correct that mistake before it's useful to correct it. Roger led the conversation from the front, loud, easy, the way men do who've never once been told they were talking too much. Boat trip, market conditions, and then, inevitably, Tyler. "The kid's a natural at Halbrook," Roger said, refilling his glass. "Board loves him. Leadership's in the blood, I think." He glanced my way when he said it, informatively, the way you look at someone when you want the contrast noticed without having to say it out loud. I nodded appreciatively. "That's wonderful," I said. "You must be proud." Then Deborah turned to Marissa with a smile that had a very specific shape to it. "And Marissa, it must be such a comfort, having a husband who provides so well. Not every girl gets that." The table went quiet for half a second. Marissa smiled graciously. I saw her eyes, though. I saw them. I picked up my water glass and said nothing, because the folder hadn't come out yet, and I knew, with the particular certainty you only get from waiting a long time for something, that once it did, this table was going to look very different by the end of the night. The folder came out with dessert. I'd been at that table 2 hours. 2 hours of nodding, 2 hours of complimenting wine I hadn't really been tasting, 2 hours of laughing at Roger's stories at exactly the volume they required. I'd played the part. Sweet old dad, fixes fences, drives the junker. Nobody at that table suspected there was anything underneath it. Then Roger reached down beside his chair, and I felt that particular internal shift, the one you learn to recognize after decades of waiting for things. He set a leather folder on the table, smoothed it once with his palm, slid it toward me. Warren, he said, getting my name right this time, his voice dropping into a rehearsed register. There's something we wanted to bring up as a family. I looked at the folder. Didn't touch it yet. Deborah's hands were folded in her lap. Tyler had straightened in his chair like a man trying to look relaxed about something he very much was not relaxed about. Marissa glanced at me, quick, then back at her father. I looked at her hands. Not still. Tyler's got a real opportunity. Roger continued, starting his own logistics consultancy. The kind of thing that only comes around once. We believe in him completely. As you should, I said warmly. What we're proposing, Roger said, nodding at the folder, is straightforward. Marissa's trust from her grandmother, the Halloran family trust, used as collateral to secure the startup financing. Fully legal, drawn up properly, nothing under the table. We just need your blessing, Warren. As Tyler's father, he looked at Tyler, calm, certain, already spending money he'd decided was coming, and I thought, you have no idea whose table you're actually sitting at. I picked up the folder, opened it, read every page slow and careful while the candles burned down and the clock on the wall ticked through every second of it, and nobody said a word. I read every clause. Then I closed it, set it down gently, picked my water back up, took a slow sip, and looked at Roger with the warmest smile I've got. I appreciate the thought behind this, I said. I'll look it over carefully. Roger exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath the whole dinner. Tyler's shoulders dropped half an inch. Deborah reached for her wine, relieved, believing the hard part was done. They thought they'd won. I finished my water, made pleasant conversation another 20 minutes, thanked Deborah for the evening, shook Roger's hand firm, held his eyes 1 second longer than he expected. He had no idea what that second meant. I walked out. The valet brought the Ranger around with the look of a man who'd spent the evening judging a truck and made his peace with it. I tipped him more than he expected and drove home through the dark. I said nothing for 11 days. Not a word, not a ripple. I fixed the fence line properly. I had coffee with Frank Wednesday. I drove the Ranger to the feed store and back like any other week. On day 4, Tyler texted, "Hey Dad, hope you had a chance to look at the proposal. Pretty exciting stuff, right?" I waited 3 hours, then wrote back, "Still going through it, son. These things take time." He sent a thumbs up. I set the phone down and made a different call. Not to Tyler, not to Roger, to 3 men on the Halbrook Freight Regional Board, men who'd known me a long time and understood that when I called directly, it wasn't a social visit. "Run the audit," I said. "Full scope. Start today." Because here's what Tyler didn't know. What Roger and Deborah, celebrating over their good wine out in Cedar Hollow, didn't know either. I had personally written the employment contract Tyler signed 2 years ago. Every clause, including one buried on page 11, a non-compete and fiduciary duty clause, I'd drafted 12 years before Tyler ever came into the picture. Written for exactly this kind of man, the kind who thinks he's smarter than the room he's standing in. I'd waited 12 years. I could wait 11 more days. What the audit turned up took 9 days to fully document. When it landed on my desk, I sat with it a long time. Not because I was surprised, because I wanted to be sure, completely sure, before I did anything about it. Tyler had spent 6 months quietly building his own logistics consultancy on company time, using Halbrook's client list and vendor contacts to line up his own book of business, all of it aimed directly at competing with the very company that employed him, believing, with total confidence, that nobody above him was paying attention. He'd forgotten something I consider basic. You cannot build a business in secret inside a house owned by the man you're hiding it from. Every meeting, every contact, every hour of it on company time, all documented, all sitting in a folder on my desk on a Thursday morning when I put on my one gray suit and drove the Ranger to Halbrook Freight Systems. I parked in the reserved spot out front, the one with a small plaque that just said Millbrook Holdings, the spot Tyler had walked past probably 500 times without once asking whose name that was. I walked into the conference room and sat at the head of the table, regional board to my left, our attorney to my right, the folder in front of me, and waited for Tyler to walk in, believing he was showing up for a routine Thursday check-in. The door opened. He walked in easy, the way he always does, scanned the room, took in the board, the lawyer, the folder, and then his eyes landed on me, sitting at his table, in a suit he'd never once seen me wear. I watched the understanding move across his face floor by floor. The hiring, the contract, the audit. Roger's proud smile at that table, the folder sliding across to me. Every piece of the last 2 years arriving all at once on a Thursday morning. The silence held 10 full seconds. I let every one of them sit. "Sit down, son," I said, quiet. He sat. "I'm going to say this once," I said. "Not because I'm angry. I want you to hear that part first. Anger's for men who didn't see something coming. I saw this coming the night you told me you'd landed that job." I opened the folder. "Halbrook Freight Systems belongs to Millbrook Holdings. Millbrook Holdings belongs to me. Has for 22 years. The company you run, the paycheck you cash, the reputation you've spent 2 years building, all of it exists because I built the ground it's standing on. I gave you that job because I believed in what I saw in you. And for 6 months, you used everything I gave you to build something meant to take a bite out of the hand that fed you." I closed the folder. "Every part of what the audit found is covered under the clause you signed. Our legal team is ready to take this all the way if that's what happens next." Whatever confidence he'd walked in with was gone entirely now. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, very young. "But," I said, "I'm not interested in ruining you. I'm interested in this being clear. So here's what happens. You resign today, quiet, professional, your name stays clean, this stays inside these walls. Or we go the other direction, and everything in this folder becomes public record." He looked at the board, looked at the lawyer, looked back at me, and I saw something in his face I hadn't expected to see. Not anger, not an excuse forming. Shame. Real, quiet shame. The kind that only shows up when a man finally sees himself clearly and doesn't like what's looking back. "I'll resign," he said, and it cost him something to say it. "Good," I said. I stood, buttoned my jacket, picked up the folder. At the door, I turned back. "One more thing. That proposal your father-in-law brought to dinner. Marissa's trust as collateral. I let that sit exactly 1 second. My lawyers moved that trust into her name this morning. Fully hers, irrevocable, no signature required but her own. So, that proposal's about money that isn't sitting where anybody thought it was anymore. Tell Roger and Deborah I said thank you for dinner." The lamb was excellent. I drove home in the Ranger. The engine cleared its throat, starting up like it always does. I turned onto my road as the light was going gold over the ridge, and pulled into my driveway and just sat there a minute. 64 years of being the man nobody looks at twice, and knowing the whole time exactly who I was. I patted the dash once. Good girl, I thought. Then I went inside and called my son. He showed up 20 minutes later and found me at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee already poured. He sat down across from me and looked at my face a long moment, the way he's looked at my face since he was small enough to sit on my knee. I told him everything, from the start, the company, the hire, the clause I'd written 12 years before he ever needed it, the audit, the boardroom. The trust moved into Marissa's name before he'd even finished his second cup of coffee that morning. Every piece of it, laid out plain. When I finished, he sat quiet a long time. Then he looked up at me and asked the only question that mattered, the one I'd been carrying the answer to for 30 years. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" I looked down at my coffee, out the window at the dark ridge, back at my son, at his mother's steadiness sitting right there in his face. "Because I wanted you to build your own life. I said. Not one handed to you because of what I own. I never wanted you looking at me and seeing a company. I wanted you seeing your father. He didn't cry. Not exactly. But he got close. I put my hand over his on the table and let the quiet sit there with us a while. And I thought about Roger sitting very still out at that big house in Cedar Hollow, Deborah setting her wine glass down slow, Marissa trying to find the words to explain to her parents why the man in the flannel shirt who fixes his own fences turned out to be the one person at that table they should never, not for one single second, have underestimated. I thought about all of it, and then I let it go, because the only thing that mattered in that whole night was sitting right across the table from me, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, tired around the eyes. My son, the best thing I ever built. Some men don't look like much. They just are what they are, all the way down, and the ones who look right past them always find out eventually, one way or another. If this one landed for you the way I hope it did, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.